The title of this little reflection is Thou Shalt Not Shame. When I was a young child, I heard over and over and over again the refrain, "Sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you." This is an absurdity, but it was drummed into me as a child in the 1940s by my family, the nuns, and other people that I respected. Although I have no memory of priests or religious brothers using that sentence, I knew the statement was wrong from even the little human experience I had. But I went along with it because I knew that what these people were trying to communicate to me was, stop getting into fights with other kids because they call you a bad name. In truth, words can hurt and can hurt deeply. When so employed, they are instruments of violence. They can leave scars and consequences that are long-term or even permanent. A normal motivation for taking violent retaliation against someone or violent revenge on someone is that they have physically or psychologically brought pain into a life. Words can be weaponized to significantly hurt and harm people. By words alone, people have been brought to commit suicide, have been enraged to the point of committing murder, have been emptied of all possibility of joy in life, have been deprived of sanity, hope, meaning, and even trust in God. Words are capable of brutalizing a person to the depths of his or her very being. The degree to which an act, that is, a word or deed, can injure someone always depends on a panoply of known and unknown variables. Physically, I could steal $10 from Bill Gates, and it wouldn't motivate him to blink an eye. If I stole $10 from a person for whom this $10 is the very last money he or she has to feed their children, it could motivate murderous retaliation. The point is that the $10 in itself, like a word in itself, is a neutral matter. However, deeds and words are chosen human acts, and they are chosen in a context that affects other human beings. No human being ever knows how a choice is going to affect another person, because he or she possesses only a minimal comprehension of the external or the internal life of that other person. Shaming is as American as apple pie in Hollywood movies, in television shows, and in everyday life. We live in a society where mocking other people, belittling other people, running down other people is normalized. Indeed, it is a profitable occupation if one is adept enough at it. The everyday corporate media feeds children, from toddlers to teenagers, a smorgasbord of verbal put-downs of one person by another. But note, even in the entertainment media, disparaging words alone can motivate the offended fictional character to acts of violence of one sort or another. The message to children and these corporate media kind of kid shows is this: you are only somebody, you are superior, if you can throw out a wisecrack that will get people to laugh at another person's flaws or idiosyncrasies. Of course, the victim of one's cutting remarks is not an insentient rock, but a sentient human being. Where and how the mocking jibe lands in the victim's psyche, emotions, or situation in life at a particular instant determines whether it will be dealt with like water off a duck's back or will incite violent rage. But regardless of how it is evaluated in the brain of the recipient of the demeaning words, he or she knows that they are being treated by the other as a thing to get a laugh and to enhance the other's life at the victim's expense. He or she knows they are not being respected, let alone cared for as human persons with feelings, defects, deficiencies, and limitations. No one is totally immune from being drawn in a split second into a state of murderous fury by words directed at him or her. When the words of someone hurt another, they are violence, just as much as a knife plunged into a person is violence. And when words inflame another to act violently, they are the cause of violence. Dr. James Gilligan published a book entitled Violence, Our Deadly Epidemic and Its Causes. At the time, he was director of the Center for the Study of Violence at Harvard Medical School and former medical director of the Bridgewater State Hospital for the Criminally Insane. Dr. Gilligan was later brought in as director of mental health for the entire Massachusetts prison system because of its high suicide and murder rate. When he left 10 years later, the rates of both murder and suicide had virtually dropped to zero. Unfortunately, his book on violence and its causes was for the most part ignored among most peace and justice groups and by the Christian churches. Speaking only as one human being who has been around peace and justice groups and Christians of every ilk for over 50 years and around the institutional Catholic Church for over 80 years, I would say that these associations of people acutely need to study Gilligan's insights and to spiritually, structurally, and creatively alter long-standing and contemporary understandings and practices accordingly. Let me present here a few pertinent insights from Dr. Gilligan's book on violence. Quote, "Violence is a contagious disease, not an hereditary one. The pathogen is psychological, not biological, and it spreads primarily by social, economic, and cultural vectors, not biological ones. How might we discover what the pathogen is? My own approach to the study of violence has been, says Dr. Gilligan, to sit down with violent people and ask them why they had been violent. The prison inmates that I worked with have told me repeatedly that they chose violence, quote, because he disrespected me, or he disrespected the person who came to visit me in prison. The word disrespect is so central in the vocabulary, in the moral system, in the value system of these violent men that they have abbreviated into the slang term, he dissed me. In all known cultures, the withdrawal of respect inspires the sentiment of shame, says Dr. Gilligan. I have yet to see a serious act of violence that was not provoked by the experience of feeling shamed and humiliated, disrespected, ridiculed, or dissed, and that did not represent an attempt to prevent or undo the loss of faith, no matter how severe the future punishment may be, even if it included death. Gilligan goes on to say the emotion of shame is the primary or ultimate cause of all violence, whether towards others or towards the self. The different forms of violence, whether towards individuals or entire populations, are motivated by shame. The purpose of the violence is to diminish the intensity of the shame and to replace it, as far as possible, with its opposite, which is pride through revenge, thus preventing the person from being overwhelmed psychologically or spiritually destroyed by the feeling of shame. End of quote. Carl Jung and many others have expressed in their writings the judgment that, quote, shame is a soul-eating emotion, close quotes. It is an attack on the very being of a person. It is the reduction of a human person to a subhuman object to be abused for the gratification of another. In its wake, it leaves resentment, anger, and the desire to retaliate in order to show the other, I am a human being equal to you, and not a thing you can abuse to advance your interest by belittling me or making a fool out of me. Every act of shaming contains a stick of dynamite, which, given the right internal mental atmosphere at the particular moment in life of the person being shamed, can explode with terrible consequences to the person shamed and to the person doing the shame. In the United States, shaming people is sport. From the smart alecky put-down, to trash talk on the playing field, to bullying in schools, to ostracization, almost no part of secular life is free of this insidious evil. Nor are the Christian churches free from it. From Nathaniel Hawthorne's Hester with her A, to pillaring, to the humiliation of Henry IV at Canossa, to shunning, to the manner in which ordinary Christians have been treated by domineering hierarchs, priests, and pastors, of every Christian denomination, from Puritans to Papists. Shaming has been and is an integral part of historical Christianity. In the writings of those who are called the early fathers of the church, there is a refrain that continually appears in one form or another, and it is this, quote, "Humility is the gateway to heaven. Humiliation is the gateway to hell." Close quote. Today in the United States, there are books published to help people enhance their ability to shame. There are companies that can be hired to shame people. So perhaps in the United States, the tolerance for being shamed is higher than in other societies, where to shame someone is often to invite a battle to the death. But regardless of the herd immunity that a society has built up or not built up, every act of shaming has a stick of dynamite in it, which may or may not be ignited depending upon the circumstances, and which most of the time the parties themselves are unaware of until all hell breaks loose. Now, in the first sentence, the very first sentence of chapter 1 of his biography, which was published in 2021, Will Smith, the Oscar recipient in 2022, who slapped the comedian on stage who made fun of his wife in order to get a laugh from the audience, writes of his chronic remembrance of the feeling of being ashamed because of his cowardice. Quote, sentence 1, chapter 1. "I have always thought of myself as a coward. Most of my memories of my childhood involved me being afraid in some way. Afraid of other kids, afraid of being hurt or embarrassed, afraid of being seen as weak. But mostly, I was afraid of my father. When I was 9 years old, I watched my father punch my mother in the side of her head so hard that she collapsed. I saw her spit blood. That moment, in that bedroom, probably more than any other moment in my life, has defined who I am today. Within everything that I have done since then, the awards, the accolades, the spotlights, the attention, the characters, and the laughs, there has been a subtle string of apologies to my mother for my inaction on that day, from failing her in that moment, for failing to stand up to my father, for being a coward." End quote. Smith continues, revealing the gravity of the shame he has lived with for a lifetime, when he writes, "What you have come to understand as Will Smith, the alien annihilating hero, the bigger-than-life movie star, is largely a construction. A carefully crafted and honed character designed to protect myself, to hide myself from the world, to hide the coward." End quote. Chris Rock, the man who publicly insulted Will Smith's wife at the Oscar Awards, is a professional stand-up comedian who has earned tens of millions of dollars publicly making fun of people, putting down or mocking ideas and people, projects. Though it is probably a rare occasion when he has had an audience of 100 million people worldwide before whom to diss, mock, or disrespect another person. Few people want to be dissed, mocked, or disrespected, let alone to be shamed before 100 million people. But it's just a joke, some people would say. Indeed, it is perceived as just a joke in a society where dissing and demeaning are the daily fare, from morning children's shows to adult newscasts, from the halls of Congress to neighborhood barrooms. It does not require a photographic memory to recall the long and ugly history, recent history, of the denigrating, demeaning, and dissing of Trump, Biden, Obama, and Bush by those who were against them, including Christians and a large swath of the peace movement. So also, for the derogatory words hurled or whispered of others by those who opposed understandings of COVID-19, 9/11, the Patriot Act, the war in Iraq, what is being done to the Palestinian people by the State of Israel, the 2020 presidential election, or the causes of the war between Russia and the Ukraine. Chris Rock insulting Will Smith's wife, and Smith slapping Rock is life in America on a micro scale. We only know what are interested in it, in this particular instance, because this act of shaming and the violent response it evoked interrupted the elaborate and luxurious fantasy world of 5,000 multimillionaires in the audience at the Oscars with a primal evil, and broke the illusion which the giant multinational corporations that own and direct everything that the Oscars are and represent wanted cultivated in the 100 million minds of those motivated to watch it. At the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus teaches, quote, "Anyone who says to his brother, Raka, will be subject to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says, you fool, will be subject to the fire of hell." Close quote. In the official Catholic commentary on the Bible, the Jerome Biblical Commentary, there is a clarification regarding this passage in Matthew. It reads as follows, quote, "Raka is found as an abusive term in the Talmud. It means fool, empty-headed, and can scarcely be distinguished from the Greek word fool. Efforts to discover some particularly insulting quality in the word fool as used by Jesus are fallacious. Interpreters deceive themselves because of the severity of Jesus, and they cannot believe that Jesus speaks so sternly of what they consider simple abusive language. The point is that the two words, raka, fool, have no particular force beyond that of colloquial abusive terms like you idiot, blockhead, numbskull, stupido, dumkopf, and their equivalents in all languages. It is just this type of language that Jesus totally forbids. The eternal threat adds to the severity of the command, but it is scarcely possible to overstate the sternness that Jesus everywhere voices towards those who refuse to love other people. The case in Matthew is not the case of one who feels anger, but of one who has excited anger by his words. Fool, rocker. Close quote. The issue is Chris Rock and what he did at the Oscar Awards and what he is a symbol of. Or perhaps more precisely, Chris Rock chose to shame someone in public. Certainly he shares at least half of the responsibility for the incident that occurred. I understand what Will Smith did, and I understand somewhat why he did it. It was wrong. It was evil, according to my conscience and my consciousness, because it was contrary to loving as Jesus loved those who mocked, dissed, and shamed him. Will Smith, however, is being castigated up one side of the corporate media and down the other, while Chris Rock is being lionized as a hero, a noble soul for preserving the dignity of the Oscar extravaganza. He has been morphed into the abused, innocent victim. Yet, Chris Rock, by his words, initiated the wicked process, viewed by 100 million people. Words hurt. Words wound. Words kill. Words are violent and cause violence. If one employs them to take a shot at someone else's weaknesses or imperfections, and thereby shames him or her, that shot might just hit the wrong nerve at the wrong time, and the blowback might be all-out retaliation in order to save face. Jesus says that, quote, "It is not what enters the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth that defiles," close quote. So-called hate speech does in fact demean and shame. It has recently been criminalized in the United States because it can incite violence. At least this is the reason most often offered for it being legally removed from the protection of the freedom of speech clause of the U.S. Constitution. Whether the reason given is the actual motivation for the elites, the politicians, and the judges, creating ever more exceptions to what people can say without incurring criminal punishment, is questionable. But the hate speech does harm to people and does incite violence by demeaning and shaming people. That is beyond question. Hate speech laws put an end to the cultural fallacy that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. If words alone can legally hurt, incite violence and shame, then words alone can hurt, incite violence, and shame people, whether or not they are declared a criminal offense by a government. Shaming cannot be legislated out of existence. If a human being wishes to demean, shame, or diss someone, there are no limitations on how to accomplish this, except the creative capacities of the human mind. There was always another word, sound, gesture, look, by which to shame another. However, if one is a Christian and desires to follow the Jesus of the Gospels in his way of nonviolent love of all under all circumstances, then shaming others in small ways or large, to their face or behind their back, is not the will of the Father as revealed by Jesus in the Gospels. It is, unfortunately, a massive blotch on Christians, their churches, and their church leaders, that from at least the time of Constantine and maybe before, they have never learned how to live without shaming people, even shaming other Christians, for their pleasure, for status, or for personal earthly gain. Indeed, the overwhelming majority of Christians see nothing wrong with shaming others and even think it can be loving, redemptive, holy, and a gateway to heaven. Jesus, God made flesh, gave only one commandment, and that was at the Last Supper on the night before he was to endure his shameful passion and murder by crucifixion. His words at the time were, "A new commandment I give you, love one another as I have loved you." This explicit Holy Thursday new commandment, in Latin novum mandatum, by Jesus, according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, section 1970, quote, contains the entire moral law of the gospel. This mandatum, this new commandment, according to another section of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, 2822, summarizes the will of the Father that is to be done on earth as it is in heaven. Interpreting this new commandment through the historical deeds and words of Jesus, as found in the Gospels, we see that Jesus does not shame those who mock him, make fun of him, or shame him. He does what he has taught is the will of the Father. He loves his enemies, prays for those who are persecuting and shaming him, does good to those who are doing him evil. This new commandment of Jesus self-evidently means, if you are a Christian and want, say, to burn witches in good Christian conscience, you simply have to show where Jesus burnt witches in the Gospels, or where his words and deeds taught or condoned the burning of witches by his disciples. So also is the case with Christians shaming people. As surely as Jesus' new commandment intrinsically contains within it, "Thou shalt not burn witches," it also integrally contains, "Thou shalt not shame an infinitely loved son or daughter of the Father of all." Again, as stated in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the entire will of God that is to be done on earth as it is done in heaven is summarized in Jesus' new commandment, end quote. There is no witch burning and no shaming in heaven, as there is no enmity and no violence in heaven. This is so because heaven is eternal life in communion with God, who is love, agape. There is not a speck of evil in heaven, because there is not a speck of evil in God. Witch burning, shaming, enmity, and violence are all evil, are not of God, have no place in heaven, and no place on earth. They are acts that, when chosen by the Christian, explicitly announce to the world, I do not want your will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. Thou shalt not shame is integrally a part of Jesus' new commandment, to love one another as I have loved you. The consequences in not following it are to open the door to enmity, violence, and hell on earth. I am Emmanuel Charles McCarthy.